Abercrombie, Lascelles, Ace Books Controversy, Accox Green, Warwickshire, Acta Senatus, Adaptations, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, poem, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil and Other Verses from the Red Book, I, Adar Nín, Anulindale, Akalabeth, The Downfall of Numenor, Alcarmi Tarmanel na Erun, Aldarion and Erindus, The Mariner's Wife, Aldershot, Hampshire, Allegory, The Alphabet of Dairon, Aman, Ambarkanta, The Shape of the World, The Ambidexter's Sentence, Ankernarula, Ankernadissa at Haile Maithad, Annals of Beleriand, Annals of Valinor, Appearance, An Application for the Rawlinson and Bosworth Professorship of Anglo-Saxon, Oxford, Art, The Art of the Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, The Art of the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, Arthur, in the Matter of Britain, Athrabeth, Finrod a Andreth, Atlakavitha, Atlantis, Attacks of Taste, Auden, Wystan Hugh, of Aule and Yavanna, Arthurial Presence. Welcome, I'm Professor Rachel Fulton Brown, and this is The Forge of Tolkien. How many of you could fill in the blanks if I just asked you what I read? So last time I made a few mistakes, and they've haunted me ever since because, of course, when I'm talking off the top of my head and trying to draw on all the knowledge that I have occasionally, I do remember things misremember them. For example, this is the kind of thing that keeps me awake at night, right? Patrick Wormold was not, in fact, Francis Wormold's son. He was the son of a historian, which is probably why I got it confused, because I heard Patrick Wormold speak at Kalamazoo back in 1996. I hope I got that right off his Wikipedia entry. I was there, and he was introduced as the son of Brian Wormold, who was a very important historian of 17th century England. And when I was trying to figure out what references Tolkien was making in his Notion Club papers to Wormold, and well, I made a mistake. And then I was riffing off of, well, why was he worrying about 100 entries for those Notion Club papers, the diary entries in the chronology? And I was saying, oh, maybe he's thinking of Sir Gawain and Pearl, both of which Tolkien did translations of. And I thought 100, that's important, right? Well, no, both of them have 101 stanzas. Oh, and then I also had some reference in there, I think, to M.R. James, and I was trying to remember whether he was at Oxford or Cambridge, because basically they're both the same place, except they're not, because they're great rivals, and, well, M.R. James was at Cambridge. How many of you care about that kind of trivia and about knowing absolutely everything about Tolkien's life? Well, guess what? There's a resource. And that's what I thought I'd do today, just as a little refreshment from the hard thinking that we're doing about time travel. We're going to do a little different kind of time travel, just diving into this wonderful guide and companion, which comes in this lovely box set of, I'll hold it up a little bit longer, lovely box set of 3 hardcovers, originally published in 2006, updated 10 years later in 2017, by the husband and wife team of librarians, Christina Scull and Wayne G. Hammond, who have created in 3 volumes now I suppose it's the definitive chronology. I can't imagine anybody's going to redo it sooner than the next 10 years, maybe, but chronology of Tolkien's life. That took 1 volume, and then 2 more volumes of guide to, well, I read you the list of articles that they have under the alphabet A, and now, having read those out for you, I want to dive in and say, well, what is the I, Adar Nín? We'll look that up. How many of you know? Do you know? Are you going to be able to tell me before I get there? Partial translation by Tolkien into Sindarin, see Languages Invented, of the Lord's Prayer. Edited with notes and analysis by Bill Weldon, published in Vinyar Tengwar, 44 June 2002, pages 21 to 30 and 38. Tolkien wrote a Adar Nín during the 1950s on the verso of postcard containing one of his Kenya, see Languages Invented, translations of the Lord's Prayer, see Words of Joy. The manuscript is reproduced on page 23 of the Vinyar Tengwar article. Well, and I think that also solves what as I was reading, it's the Alkar mi Tarmanel na Erun. That is another of these translations that Tolkien was making into Kenya. The Alkar mi Tarmanel na Erun is translations of the opening verse of the Gloria from Luke 2:14 into Kenya, see Languages Invented, edited with notes and analysis by Arden R. Smith, published in Vinya Tengwar 44 June 2002, pages 31 through 7. 5 texts are extant, dating evidently from the mid-1960s. We also have the very interesting entry, an application for the Rawlinson and Bosworth Professorship of Anglo-Saxon, Oxford. What on earth could that be? Oops, it's under application. Anne. Okay. An application for the Rawlinson and Bosworth Professorship of Anglo-Saxon in the University of Oxford by J.R.R. Tolkien, Professor of the English Language in the University of Leeds, June 25th, 1925. This was his job application for the position at Oxford. Pamphlet, 12 pages, privately printed for Tolkien, in which he conveys his credentials to the electors for the Rawlinson and Bosworth chair, accompanied by a list of his publications and testimonials by colleagues and university officials. Lascelles Abercrombie, who was our very first entry in the A's, Henry Bradley, L.R. Farnell, George S. Gordon, Alan Mauer, Emmy Sadler, and Joseph Wright. Most of Tolkien's statement was printed in letters, pages 12 to 13. So we could carry on like that, but how far would you want to go? At what level of knowledge do we want to be studying who Tolkien was? What kind of knowledge do we need in order to feel immersed in his stories? How curious are we about, well, things like the full chronology of his life? Now, this is new to me. I, in fact, just got this in the mail right this weekend, and so I thought I'd give you a treat, and it's sort of like an impromptu book review of books I haven't read yet. It's the set for 3 hardcover volumes is not that expensive. Certainly, if you're a book nerd like I am, books there was a phrase someone once gave me. It's like you know where your values are when it's easy to pay for them, right? And if you could see my home, you would see that books are the thing that, if I have an addiction, it's definitely books, right? If I see a book and I want it and I buy it, which means forgoes other things like my costumes, or I don't know, what other kinds of things would I value? Well, certainly for me, it was easy buying this set of books. It was $90. Your mileage may vary on whether you think that's a good investment, but I think it's telling to say, well, this is a set of reference books that probably, if you were seeing the sort of iceberg of things that people know about Tolkien, would it be down there with, you know, the letters? I saw one of those memes, right, with the iceberg, and, you know, getting down. Someone said, where was the History of Middle Earth, which is the 12-volume set of the drafts and so forth that we were reading from. For example, the Notion Club. All the books are there. You can't see them. I would be curious, and I would hope that maybe you all are comfortable enough with me now to start giving me some feedback on my blog as well as Fox's. How many of you would dive this deep in your desire to learn about Tolkien, right? And the chronology, I when I opened it up to start skimming around, I was thinking, well, how long is this chronology? How much of Tolkien's life is it actually involving? Well, the chronology, just the chronology, and I'm going to read to you a little bit of it, is 816 pages long, and it's much longer than, in fact, Humphrey Carpenter's biography, which you can say, if you're trying to understand a person's life, if you're trying to understand an author, do you need his day-by-day Diary entries. For example, 6th of September 1955. Tolkien completes a form applying for membership in the Society of Authors. In a covering letter to the Society, he apologizes for not answering an invitation for membership he had received 5 years earlier. From the date he had received it, as he was about to move house, and it has now only come to light. 7th of September 1955, Tolkien replies to a letter from Richard Jeffrey, written at least in part in Tengwar, asking for a translation of one of Treebeard's songs in The Lord of the Rings and explanations of various words and names. The letters are going to be in, sorry, I got great stacks and piles and are going to come tumbling down. The letters are in Humphrey Carpenter's edition of the letters. This was a selection that Humphrey made with the assistance of Christopher Tolkien. It's certainly not Tolkien's complete correspondence. The family has not released everything. But much of what I've been telling you about, Tolkien's reflections on his own writing process come from the edition of the letters, and so this is these in the chronology. Scull and Hammond are simply giving you references to those letters. But it's like, how do you really need to know what happened on 7th of September 1955? At what level knowledge are we curious? 8th of September 1955, Tolkien replies to a letter from a Mrs. Souch, explaining why The Return of the King had not been published in the spring. He had written the narrative long ago, but providing material for the appendices proved a long and difficult task. You realize, in effect, and I realize I didn't prep my stacks here properly. In effect, with the companion and guide that Hammond and Scull have put together, they've reproduced in a way the appendices to The Lord of the Rings, which, if you all are familiar with them, they begin with the Tale of Years, right? Appendix A. Sorry, I'm flipping around. So we have the Annals of the Kings and the Númenórean Kings, and we have those chronologies, and then Appendix, which also includes the Kings of the Mark and the Years. Appendix B, the Tale of Years. Sorry, I'm confusing my own my own appendix. We have Appendix C, the family trees, which that must be in the guides. The guide also includes not only those topical entries, which we're going to spend a little bit more time exploring, but the guide includes things like family trees of the Tolkiens, Suffield's, Edith's family, and the Tolkiens, and so all of their children, and this is Arthur Rule, Tolkien, Mabel Suffield, John Ronald Rule, and then Hilary Arthur Rule. His brother married Magdalene Matthews. Hilary and Magdalene had Gabriel, Julian, and Paul. They all got married. Gabriel had Angela and Christopher married an Angela. Assuming that's not his sister, but just his sister. His wife is in the same name as his sister. Angela had 3 daughters, and Christopher and Angela had Peter, James, and Andrew. Okay, so those are Tolkien's great nieces and nephews, right? We have John Ronald Rule Tolkien married Edith Bratt. They have the 4 children: John Francis Rule, Michael Hilary Rule, Christopher Rule, and Priscilla Mary Rule. Michael married Joan Griffiths. They have Michael George, Joanna Judith. I know there's a Rachel. Oh, here it is. That Christopher's second wife, I did not know that. I didn't know he'd been twice married. So Christopher's first wife was Faith Falconbridge, and they had Simon, and Simon had Nicholas and Anna. But then Christopher married Bailey Class, and they had Adam and Rachel was born in 1971. And Priscilla is not listed with any children or spouse, and John Francis is not listed with any children or spouse. How much do you care about all of these details? And I know that, I've been advertising these videos out in Facebook and Twitter, and trying to find, other interested readers of Tolkien to say, please come think about Tolkien with me, please come read Tolkien with me, and studying those Facebook groups and studying the kinds of things that people share in the groups. I found out about this companion and guide from someone posting her set saying, look what just showed up in the mail. And it seems that the Tolkien fandom wants to have this kind of knowledge, but more of them spend time sharing their own art, which is I think interesting, and sometimes asking about, sometimes you all, I hope some of you are here from my Facebook post, asking about details of the stories and details of the characters. And well, you could do the same thing that I did just with the Tolkien family trees with the Baggins of Hobbiton. Here's Bilbo Baggins marries Beryl of Boffin. They have Mungo, Pansy, Ponto, Largo, Lily. Largo has marries Tanta Hornblower, and they have Fosco, who marries Ruby Bolger. Fosco and Ruby have Dora, Drogo, and Dudo. And Drogo marries Primula Brandybook, and they're the parents of Frodo. Ooh, look, there's a Milo in here. Well, that's exciting. It's a sort of interesting problem of reading genealogies. We have genealogies, then there's the appendixes of the languages, the calendars, and then the languages, the alphabet, the Tengwar, and then the index, which in this edition that I'm using, which is an easy paperback to work with, Christina Scull Wayne G. Hammond did the index for this volume. It mattered to me that I knew whether Patrick Wormald was Francis Wormald's son, because I was trying to, well, prove to you a little bit, right? I was showing off, which is why I made the mistakes, and that's a little bit of my pride, and I shouldn't possibly be doing that. I was trying to give you a sense of being part of the inner circle of people who talk about medieval history, which I kind of, I guess, am, right? And I had heard Patrick Wormald give a talk at Kalamazoo, and in the session that he gave the talk, Michael Wood was also speaking there. Michael Wood is like really famous as a television presenter for the BBC, and he gave this really great impromptu lecture for an hour on Ethelstan, and I was very impressed, and he was kind of sexy and well-spoken and clearly was used to being on camera, which all of these things, it's like, what is it that we're trying to achieve by knowing the sorts of details that Hammond and Scull have spent decades putting together? It's interesting that they're in that list of entries that I gave you in the A's, right, that we have two books, The Art of the Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien and The Art of the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Those are actually Hammond and Scull's first publications together. After art, what they say, The Art of the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, edited by Wayne G. Hammond and Christina Scull, with an introduction and brief explanatory text, first published in Great Britain by HarperCollins, London, and in the United States by Houghton Mifflin, Harcourt, Boston, both in October 2015. The volume contains every piece of art, including calligraphy and maps, known to the authors at the time of writing to have been produced by Tolkien in relation to The Lord of the Rings. A list of Tolkien's published art is included in the second volume of the Reader's Guide. They, Hammond and Scull have been working together since 1995, or they met a little bit before that, I think 1994, but the first book that they published together is one of my favorite Tolkien books. It's J.R.R. Tolkien, Artist and Illustrator, and there they published many of the drawings that have now since become famous, because they're the ones that are most familiar to people from Tolkien's own artwork. I don't actually, I realize, have The Art of the Hobbit or The Art of the Lord of the Rings. I'm not sure that they're separate items. I've in fact seen some of the art that Tolkien did, because I have visited Marquette University's library. Marquette is just north of Chicago in Wisconsin, And there, it's a Jesuit. Now, see, I did it off the top of my head. I don't want to. Maybe I should look at Marquette. Is Marquette in here? They are. Ooh, I could see if Marquette is in here. This is the kind of thing that you want to be able to do. It would appear not. I think that Marquette should be in the guide. Let's see if we can find it in the index. Yes, okay, it's in Purchase of Tolkien Manuscripts, that's what I want. Chronology 526 to 68, oh no, Guide 248, okay, 240, Collecting and Sales, yes, alright. Here we go, Collecting and Sales. The first and only major sale of manuscripts and typescripts by Tolkien occurred in 1957 by private treaty between Tolkien himself and Marquette University. Oh, and apparently there's a full entry for Marquette under Libraries and Archives. Do we want to follow that one up? Libraries and Archives. Do you see what I'm doing other than torturing you? We should have, okay, here's the entry on right, we'll get to Libraries and Archives. Okay. Marquette librarian William Reedy, who was eager to build library collections for the university, worked through the London bookseller Bertram Rota to purchase from Tolkien working papers of The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, Farmer Giles of Ham, and Mr. Bliss. The total price was £1,500, a bargain in today's market, even adjusting for inflation. But Tolkien, on his part, was satisfied with the amount. Despite the success of The Lord of the Rings, 1954 to 55, his fame was not then such that his papers, it was in 1957, or his published works would command high prices from collectors, nor were they widely sought or sold. Not until 1977, the year in which both his long-awaited Silmarillion and Humphrey Carpenter's biography were published, did the collector's market for Tolkieniana become significantly active. The 1978 animated feature film of The Lord of the Rings by Ralph Bakshi, see Adaptations, also helped to generate interest. So what I was saying is I've actually been up to Marquette. I was myself invited to give a lecture there about Mary. That's another story in different videos. And arranged to meet with a librarian and was shown a number of their pieces. And so it's like I've made one of the great Tolkien pilgrimages, the one that I can do from here. And so I've seen some of those drawings, and I'm saying all of this is my windy way through the guides. It's like, at what point am I going to lose you? At what point don't you care anymore? Well, I'm going to tell you more about Marquette University. Let's see. The J.R.R. Tolkien Collection, now in the Department of Special Collections and University Archives, John P. Rayner, S.J. Oh, this is Jesuit. Library, Marquette University, was established during Tolkien's lifetime. William B. Reddy, director of libraries at Marquette, had been charged with the collection of material to support research at the university and recognized the importance of The Lord of the Rings as literature soon after its publication. That's actually remarkable, since we talked in Stories for Children about the reception that Tolkien's work had had among the critics, and yet here is a Catholic university in Marquette, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, right? This is a happier story about things that are happening north of Chicago right now, not Kenosha. This Jesuit university wanted Tolkien's papers more or less immediately, right? Probably at the end of 1956 or the beginning of 1957, Reedy inquired through the London bookseller Bertram Rota if Tolkien would be willing to sell to Marquette the manuscripts of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Rota pointed out that William Reedy had promoted Tolkien's work and that the presence of his manuscripts would have a positive educational effect at Marquette, a Roman Catholic university. Tolkien replied in the affirmative, and after a brief period of negotiation in which the manuscripts of Farmer Giles of Ham and the then unpublished Mr. Bliss were added to the agreement, he accepted £1,500 in payment, a fair sum at the time when Tolkien had not yet achieved fame as a writer of fiction. Files of papers concerning The Hobbit, Farmer Giles of Ham, and Mr. Bliss went to Marquette via Bertram Rota in June 1957, The Lord of the Rings files, or rather some of them, were not sent until the following year. The reason for this, Christopher Tolkien explains in his foreword to The Return of the Shadow, quote, was that my father had undertaken to sort, annotate, and date the multifarious manuscripts of The Lord of the Rings, but found it impossible at that time to do the work required. It's clear that he never did so, and in the end let the papers go just as they were. It was noted when they reached Marquette that they were in no order. Had he done so, he must have seen at that time that, very large though the manuscript collection was, it was nonetheless incomplete. And the entry goes on to give us more details about the papers that they had there. So we're starting to, this is what you end up doing as a scholar, and as the sense of I want to be talking to those of you who care about Tolkien as an author, to get inside his world, to understand. I mean, it's like in the entries that I read you, just the A's. We're just doing. Maybe I'm only going to get to A's today. We've had the Kenyan translation of the Gloria and the Our Father. Would you want to know more about, for example, the Athrabeth, Finrod, Andreth, which is in fact one of my favorite of the post Lord of the Rings text. It's published in Morgoth's Ring, which it's under the pile over there, and is a conversation between Finrod and Andreth. Finrod, the elf, the Noldoran elf, Finrod of Nargothrond, and Andreth, a wise woman of the house of Beor. It's a record of this debate, which took place in the First Age during the long siege of Angaband, circa 409, was supposedly preserved in the lore of the Eldar and called in Sindarin, which there's an entry for that, and languages invented, Athrabeth, Finrod, Andreth. In this, Andreth rejects the belief of the elves that it was through Eru's design or as a result of the general marring of Arda that men are short-lived. She says that some of the wise among her people preserve a tradition that men, quote, were not made for death, nor born ever to die. Death was imposed on us, and behold, the fear of it is with us always. Page 309. According to their lore, we knew that in our beginning we had been born never to die, and by that we meant born to life everlasting, without any shadow of any end. Finrod suggests it's not death, but the fear of it, which comes from Melkor, and says that, elves too have died. Andreth points out that the elves do not die unless slain and may return to life, while all men die and we go out to no return. Death is an uttermost end, a loss redeemable. Finrod replies that although the elves may endure as long as Arda, they do not know their fate beyond its end, and Melkor had been able to change the very nature of men, and that in Eru's despite, page 312. Then he is far more powerful than the elves believed. Finrod suggests that only Eru would be able to do such a thing, and asks what men did to anger him. Andreth is unwilling to reply. Tolkien apparently made a glossary or brief index of names and terms appearing in the Athrabeth with definitions and some etymological information. This is published in Morgoth's Ring, and the entry goes on. Now, we've seen one aspect of studying Tolkien is knowing where the original manuscripts are. Another is studying these other stories. Another is studying the translations that he made into his own languages. Another is, knowing the people. This Abercrombie, whom I don't know who is, Lascelles, Shells, I'm not sure. He read science at the Owens College, Manchester, but only after 2 sessions. Turned instead to journalism, poetry, drama, and the study of literature. Major figure in the Georgian poets. He was most famously associated with a group of writers, also including Rupert Brooke and Edward Thomas, that clustered around Dimmock and Gloucestershire. He has various poems. He was professor at English literature at the University of Leeds. Succeeding George S. Gordon, Tolkien, then reader of English language at Leeds, had also sought the chair. Abercrombie was head of the department at Leeds and wrote a glowing letter of recommendation for Tolkien to get the Rawlinson and Bosworth chair at Oxford. He named Tolkien, quote, my principal colleague in the English department, who has throughout acted as my advisor and collaborator in the conduct and policy of the department as a whole. I've never consulted him without gaining an illumination that can penetrate as well as expatiate. But I must not omit to mention that I have gained at least as much from the keen artistic sensibility as from the science of his scholarship. Oh, well, so Abercrombie left Leeds for a professorship at the University of London in 1929, remained there until 1935 when he was elected Goldsmiths Reader in English at Oxford and a Fellow of Merton College. So he and Tolkien end up back together. This sort of fascination with the author, with the papers, with the stories, with the layering, with the chronology. I mean, for me, this is certainly home territory, and is where I spend a good deal of my time in my own scholarship. When it's like once you're diving down into the particulars, does this make you feel like this story, the one that I suspect brought most of you to Tolkien, is coming more alive, or is being taken apart and turned into matters of mere trivia? Well, for example, if you know things like, let's see, we were still in September 1955, and when Tolkien's explaining why the Return of the King hasn't come out, because he's been writing those appendices. He was always making it's like, I didn't know that he made indices for the Athrobeth. That's interesting that he's indexed, and we had Christopher describing how Tolkien, was meaning to be sending off all these manuscripts to Marquette, and then didn't because he was trying to put them all in order, and then didn't because, finally sends them all off and doesn't even manage to send the full set. So the Marquette collection is incomplete in those forms, I think. I'd have to study more to know exactly how many papers they do have. I know what the librarian showed me, and of course he brought out some of the prettier ones with drawings, and here's a sample of Tolkien's handwriting. What you remember from our previous discussion that Tolkien actually typed a lot, and so those handwritten manuscripts that we have are a part of his sort of immersion in his own artistic creation of this world, but they're not necessarily the way he was writing all of this stuff. But 9th September 1955, Tolkien writes to John Sparrow concerning subscriptions and membership in the Adeundum Club. I have no idea what that is. There's an entry on clubs that we could look up. 10th September 1955, Tolkien writes to Terence Tiller, thanking him for accepting the suggested alterations. It's clearly we're in the middle of the story. Tolkien looks forward with interest to the result and to the effect of the use of music. In regards to accents, Tolkien says what he thinks should be done, although I quite understand that the need for characterization and making different speakers audibly recognizable may well override my opinion. Oh, they're doing a radio show, I think. Also, the skill of the actors may be inadequate to deal in nuances. He stresses particularly that the Hobbit gentry, Frodo, Merry, and Pippin, should not be made rustical in actual tones and accents, but Sam and Butterbur may well be characterized by speaking with a country accent of some kind. BBC Written Archives Center. He suggests the pronunciation of R might be a main characterizing detail. He will endeavor to come to London on 12th of November. 11th September 1955. A September 11th before it was September 11th. Tolkien writes to Hugh Brogan, who has queried the use of Numenor by C.S. Lewis in That Hideous Strength. He also answers a query about the shape of the world in the Third Age. I'm afraid that was devised dramatically rather than geologically or paleontologically. I do sometimes wish that I had made some sort of agreement between the imaginations or theories of the geologists and my map a little more possible, which is letters, page 224. 17th of September, Tolkien attends an early English Text Society council meeting at Magdalen College, Oxford. 18th of September, 1955. Hugh Brogan writes to Tolkien with apologies for being impertinent, stupid, or sycophantic in his letter in December 1954, criticizing the archaic narrative style of parts of The Two Towers, quoted in letters, page 225. Tolkien, who has still not answered Brogan's earlier letter, begins a draft letter explaining the difference between archaism and tushery. In the event, he abandons the letter and sends Brogan instead a brief note saying that the manner of archaism would take too long to debate in a letter and must wait until next they meet. Letters to page 225. Okay. I do sometimes, I'm certainly no Tolkien, but I am a published author, and I do sometimes get people writing to me, in effect asking, how did you do it? Or will you look at what I've written and please tell me how to do it? Give me some clue how the chronology of your life, the daily habits that you engage in, give you the place to create this timeless or work that seems to step out of time because you've written it and publish it, and it turns into something that people can come back to. I suppose making videos is it's a sort of publication, right? It's a different kind of publication, but you're trying to understand how this work, these people that are writing to Tolkien, and this is before he's managed to get the Return of the King finished, and I think I've lost track of, no, we still, yes, 20th October 1955, The Return of the King is published. 21st of October 1955, though suffering from laryngitis, Tolkien delivers the first O'Donnell lecture, English and Welsh, at 5 p.m. in the Examination Schools, Oxford. 22nd of October 1955, Tolkien receives his author's copies of The Return of the King. He inscribes one to his son Michael, and possibly also inscribes and posts other presentation copies. Tolkien writes to Miss Judson, who has written again. Tolkien has had a large number of letters, but very few from people like Miss Judson with an interest in languages. Tolkien writes to a Mr. Mitchell, who has already read The Return of the King in 2 days and expressed his approval. 24th of October 1955, Tolkien writes to Catherine Farrar. He has been surprised and pleased by the reception of The Lord of the Rings, but still feels the picture incomplete without something on Samwise and Eleanor, as in the deleted epilogue. But I could not devise anything that would not have destroyed the ending more than the hints possibly sufficient in the appendices. Letters, page 227. Tolkien writes to Joyce Bedell, possibly the same Joyce Bedell who will adapt The Lord of the Rings for the stage in 1960. I didn't know that. I didn't know there was a stage production. He is glad that his books have pleased her, and notes that The Lord of the Rings is a moral work founded on pity, on the triumph and the defeat of pity. Sotheby's English Literature History, Children's Books and Illustrations, London, 12 July 2016, page 148. Further, his books are completely English. The Germanic quality of his surname is delusory, considering that it entered England 2 centuries ago. He is frustrated with delays in publication of The Return of the King and thinks of Miss Bedell reading the book and reaching its grand but sad conclusion. How do you find the person who wrote The Lord of the Rings in this mass of daily events, correspondence? We're just playing with 1955, but that's 500 pages in to his daily chronology. When I was paging around in this, oh yes, I was finding his first lectures, right, when he becomes a fellow of Merton College in October 1945, and the term begins 14th of October 1945, Michaelmas, full term. And Michaelmas would be, well, Michaelmas is September 29th. What did he do on September 29th? We don't know, but Michaelmas is September 29th. Reviews entry that she is writing on the symbolism of the medieval liturgy and hopes that she's getting that feast day right. And why wouldn't I know all of these dates off the top of my head? I hate that. I hate having to look it up every single time, right? Well, possibly because I'm trying to, hold 2,000 years worth of dates in my head, and I'm just, I'm just not, I won't say autistic enough because I'm actually pretty good at remembering dates, but that the sort of precision of wanting to know time and this sort of embeddedness in chronology. I mean, this is taking a break from our study of time travel, right? But there is a kind of time travel in our desire to know what Tolkien did on the 14th of October, 1945. Michaelmas, full term begins. Tolkien's scheduled lectures for this term are Old English prescribed text, excluding Beowulf and Exodus, on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 11 a.m. in the Taylor Institution, beginning 16th of October. And History of the English Language to AD 1100 on Thursdays and Fridays at 12 noon in the Taylor Institution, beginning 18th of October. Tolkien not only has to prepare and deliver new lectures on subjects which are the responsibility of the Merton Professor of English Language and Literature, the history of the English language and English literature down to and during the period of Chaucer, but until his successor to the Rawlinson and Bosworth chair is elected, he also has to continue to lecture on Old English. In 1963, he will write to his son Michael, "I was never obliged to teach anything except what I loved and do with inextinguishable enthusiasm, save only for a brief time after my change of chair in 1945. That was awful." That's Letters, page 336 to 37. For this term, Tolkien will also continue to supervise B.Lit students M.Y. Offord, Né Pickard, and M.B. Salu. The next day, 15th of October, 1945, Mabel Day writes to Tolkien informing him of a change in the Early English Text Society rules for editors. 18th of October, 1945, Tolkien dines for the first time at Merton High Table and finds it, quote, very agreeable, though odd. I've eaten at Merton. I had a friend when I was a graduate student who was a research fellow at Merton, and thanks to I should have looked him up. He's back at Oxford as a full professor now, I think. But when we were both graduate students, we knew each other we were both together at Cambridge, and I went off to Columbia University in New York to do my PhD work, and he ended up as a research fellow at Merton, finishing his. He's a very great historian. My friend John Watts, a very great historian of 15th century England. Anyway, I stayed in Merton. I don't think I've eaten at High Table. I had breakfast in the Fellows breakfast hall, and I'm not sure which one it is, and I worked in the oh my goodness, I've not only have I been to Marquette and been shown manuscripts of Tolkien's own work, but I have slept in the very college where Tolkien was professor. He found it very agreeable, though odd. For fuel economy, the common room is not heated. This is in 1945, right? And the Dons meet. It's almost surreal because, of course, we're are we coming out of war? Are we still in war? What they're oh yes, it's Hammond and Scull included the atomic bombs being dropped in August. 9th of August 1945, the atomic bomb is dropped on Nagasaki. Tolkien writes to Christopher expressing his horror at the atomic bombs and the utter folly of these lunatic physicists to consent to do such work for war purposes, calmly plotting the destruction of the world. Letters, page 116. But right now, by October 1945, they're still not heating the room. For fuel economy, the common room is not heated, and the Dons meet and chat amiably on the dais until someone thinks there are enough there for grace to be said. Dons are hard to shepherd, right? Or sheepdog. They wander about. After that, they sit and dine and have their port and coffee and smoke and evening newspapers, all at High Table, in a manner that, if agreeably informal, is rather shocking to one trained in the severer ceremonies and strict precedents of medieval Pembroke. Letter to Christopher Tolkien, 2nd of October 1945. Letters, page 116 to 17. Same day, 18th of October, about 8:45 p.m., he and Hugo Dyson stroll through the Merton grounds to Magdalen College and visit Warren Lewis and R.E. Havard. They break up at about 10:30. It's 22nd of October 1945. Tolkien writes to Christopher. Tolkien inscribes 2 books by Hilaire Belloc as birthday gifts to his son Michael: Characters of the Reformation, 1936, and The Crisis of Our Civilization, 1937. I could keep doing this, and I realize every time I dive in, I find some other detail that helps me think more about my own life story in engaging with Tolkien, and my desire to touch somehow his story, whether I'm doing it in, you know, in space or meeting the people. I have met Wayne Hammond, I believe. I'm not positive. I mentioned to you that I do know some of the scholars that have worked on Tolkien and have come to Kalamazoo, as I met Patrick, you know, was in the same lecture hall that Patrick Ormond was speaking in back when Michael Wood was there. That you are, how much of this is trivia and how much of it is necessary to our own engagement with Tolkien, our own desire to be part of Tolkien's story, to know ourselves in that story, to find, well, these intersections between the world that he lived in and the world we live in now. Is it the same world, right? It's like when we're thinking about that time travel that he was playing with in the Notion Club paper, suggesting that these events are happening in 1987, and I'm saying, oh yes, and I was there when the storm hit. And there's a, I find it a very interesting problem for our scholarship to be sort of constantly weaving in and out of this, the story world, like the Athrabeth on Finrod and Andreth, and then back into the collector's world, and then here again into the world of Oxford Dons and their friendships, and then the family world, the publications, the adaptations that Tolkien's works were set to in radio, and then plays, and then movies, the art that he did. You know, by the end of it, you say, well, the reader's guides also include not only these fascinating single entries, but also long bibliographies, which are instructive and terrifying in their own way. We've done the family trees, and then we have bibliographies, which include his published works, published in his lifetime, which included that application for the Rawlinson and Bosworth Professorship of Anglo-Saxon in the University of Oxford, privately printed in June 1925. His books, The Beowulf, Monsters and the Critics, Farmer Giles, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, with lists of all of the subsequent editions that they've gone through. A Middle English Vocabulary, one of his very first ones, Oxford Clarendon Press, 1922. Smith of Wootton Major, The Tolkien Reader, Tree and Leaf. And then there's all of the list, all of the publications that came out after he died, which is a longer list of the publications that were made during his life, including The History of Middle-earth and its many volumes, and then the books edited, translated, or with a contribution by Tolkien published in his lifetime. One of the things that, of course, is fascinatingly and frustratingly and sort of, you know, if every so often one feels just a little bit envious of not being the scholar that you wish you were. But one of the things that didn't happen was Tolkien publishing very much actual scholarship, right? He's holding these great professorships, but the Rawlinson and Bosworth one, and then the Merton position, and yet his actual scholarship was somewhat thin. The Ankern Rula, the Ankern Vissa, which was his one great editing, right? Published for the Early English Text Society. You remember one of the chronology entries we have is a meeting, or that was back in September 1955. What did I find there? Sorry, you really want to keep up with me? You got to be able to do this constantly. I know you want to keep up with me. I want to keep up with me. I can't keep up with me. Where were we in September? Yes. So September 17th September 1955, Tolkien attends an Early English Text Society council meeting at Magdalen College, Oxford. Well, his Anchronavissa, which was his one great scholarly edition, was published for the Early English Text Society by the Oxford University Press in 1962, so some years after that. The translation, for which he did a preface, the translation by M.B. Salu. I think we found that person. Aha! M.B. Salu was one of his B.Lit students, supervised when he just started at Merton. We were reading those, October 1945, M.B. Salu. And M.B. Salu is the translator of the Ankara Rule, published London Burns and Notes, 1955, Notre Dame, Indiana, University of Notre Dame Press, 1956, with a preface by Tolkien. He doesn't come out with his edition until some years later. Most of the other things that are listed here as his scholarly publications, it's an interesting sort of essay. They're essays and studies. For example, the essays presented to Charles Williams, which included on fairy stories. The Jerusalem Bible, I didn't know this. Published in 1966, Tolkien contributed a translation of the Book of Jonah, revised by others before publication. Many of these other statements, collections, they'll have one poem of his, or, oh, my favorite, A New English Dictionary on Historical Principles, which is the Oxford English Dictionary, Oxford Clarendon Press, 1921, for the fascicles concerned. Tolkien contributed to at least the entries for wag, walrus, wampum, worm, wasp, water, wick as a lamp, and winter. There's a variety of all of it. Notes and corrections for an edition of The Pearl, The Reeve's Tale, with an introduction by Tolkien. An edition of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, published in 1925. His work on the dictionary and his Sir Gawain and the Green Knight were the things that I think managed to get him that professorship. You'd never get the job now with that little. That he. I've sometimes wondered this, and Tom Shippey talks about it in his biographies, that one of the things that happened thanks to the Great War was the loss of the men who could have been taking positions otherwise. And my suspicion is that some of what happened for Tolkien in his career was he was there, he was alive, right? And the people otherwise weren't available because he lost most of his friends in the Great War. And that therefore he's able to have this career and this responsibility to a certain extent because everybody else was dead. On the other hand, what we learn, and Hammond and Scull talk about this in their introduction, what we learn from their chronology is how much he was working all the time, and how things in his life sort of clash together, right? They say that altogether, all of these entries that they put in their chronology, altogether these form a picture of an extraordinarily busy man. Tolkien the scholar, Tolkien the teacher and administrator, Tolkien the husband and father, Tolkien the creator of Middle-earth. His critics have not always appreciated how busy he truly was. Those who claim that he should have published more in his academic fields had he not wasted his time writing fantasy, or those who fault him for not completing the Silmarillion as if he had nothing else to do even in his retirement. One of our aims in this book is to show how Tolkien neither wasted his time nor shirked his responsibilities, to document how much, on a regular basis, duties and connections with his academic career, lectures, classes, supervision of postgraduate students, examinations, committee meetings, occupied his waking hours, how often he and his family were beset by illness and injury, how, to pay doctor's bills in the years before the National Health Service was established in 1948, and to provide for his children's education, he added to an already heavy workload, how he was almost constantly under the threat of deadlines, and if he did not meet them all, it was not because he did too little, but because he did so much. So obviously this kind of digging around and reconstruction and bringing his life to light is one of the things that delights me as a historian, and therefore I care about the trivia. But the trivia, and this is, I suppose, a generic lesson for those of you who want to be either historians or, I don't know, but does it help with fantasy writing? I think we need to think about that. That to delight in the trivia is one thing, but to know how to bring it into to significant patterns, to see, you know, here's Mbisalu as a student, and then I think it's a she, later goes on to be the one who translates the rule for anchoresses, that you are hopefully not doing what Tolkien worried the critics did to Beowulf the poem and knocking it over and finding just stones, but you are meditating on what it means to live a full life of creativity and scholarship and storytelling and imagination. And I suppose, you know, the question that we always have as authors ourselves and as readers is how much does that life matter for understanding where the stories came from? Are we engaging in a kind of, you know, the sort of my desire to go and be where Tolkien has been in terms of, you know, touch his manuscripts. He didn't let me touch the manuscripts. You just get to see them in sleeves. But you know, be in the presence of the physical objects that an author himself worked with, or be in the place. If I go sit in Merton College library, well, the stories come to me too. And Merton is one of the oldest colleges. I'd have to look it up to remember exactly how old it is. I bet we can find it. And now I'm curious about how old Merton College is. This will be my last entry that I look up for you. You'll have to find the book yourself. Oh no, I now that I have this, clearly using this resource to help anchor the kinds of things that I'm saying about his themes or his translations or his other works or his friends. This is very useful. I've read a fair number of books on Tolkien, and can probably should do an episode that I'm referring to some of the actual, you know, interpretive scholarship, which this is, but in a different mode. But but Tolkien himself never got those manuscripts to Marquette, or got most of them but not incomplete, because he was trying to order everything and trying to take that passion that he had for his scholarship into his own sort of world building exercise in the Lord of the Rings. So Merton College, let's look up Merton College. Well, I read the bit on the dinner in the garden. Well, I suppose, yes, we can end with the place where his story ends. Although I did have, there's fandom and popularity and entries here on, including entries on Tolkien fandom in the internet. That would be us. Gaming and merchandise. Fan fiction. We wondered about that. The degree to which Tolkien desired fan fiction or inspired fan fiction. We'll probably have to come back to that later. But the last entry that we have on Merton. In August, 31st of August 1973, Tolkien was taken to a private hospital where he was diagnosed as suffering with acute bleeding gastric ulcer. John and Priscilla are summoned, but Michael and Christopher in Switzerland and France respectively. At first the reports are optimistic. The next day, 1st of September 1973, Tolkien develops a chest infection. 2nd of September 1973, John Ronald Reuel Tolkien dies early this Sunday. According to the London Times for 11 January 1974, he has left an estate with a net value after duty is paid of £144,159. He was never terrifically rich. Not like J.K. Rowling has become. £1,000 are left to the Birmingham Oratory in memory of Father Francis Xavier Morgan. £500 to Trinity College, Oxford, where both Michael and Christopher Tolkien matriculated. £300 to Exeter College, Oxford, and £200 to Pembroke College, Oxford. The Requiem Mass was held on September 6th in the Church of St. Anthony of Padua in Headington. There was a memorial service held sometime later, 17th of November 1973, held at noon in Merton College Chapel. The Reverend Mark Everett, the chaplain, officiates. The lessons are read by Neville Coghill and John Tolkien. Oxford University is represented by the Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Mr. J.B. Bamborough, and the proctors, and Merton College by the Warden and Fellows. Among those present are members of Tolkien's family, representatives of the English faculty, the Early English Text Society, Norman Davis and his wife, the Oxford University Catholic Chaplaincy, the Newman Trustees, Pembroke College, Exeter College, Campion Hall, and the Tolkien Society. Lord Halsbury, Simone de Ardennes, Mr. and Mrs. Rayner Unwin, Joy Hill, and many former students, colleagues, secretaries, and friends. Remember the dialogue that Andreth and Finrod have about whether death is our lot as human beings of necessity, or whether, as they are talking about, it's because of the fall and the great mistake that people made in imagining that they could escape death. I suppose, is there a lesson in the trivia that we are trying desperately with all of these pieces of Tolkien, these dates and this full story, wishing, certainly I do. I'm reading that in 1973. I mean, I've done it again. How do I manage this? It was very soon in 73, I was 8. Very soon after that I was reading, but finding out that I was reading the story in the edition that was published in 1973, right? So the one that came out, introduction copyright 1973, first printing in my birth year, August 1965, that you're trying to find always your place in the story. And I suppose that's a good place to end a meditation on trivia, that we burrow into all of these details. We read all of the appendices and learn the tale of years and the Hobbit genealogies and the Tengwar and the languages, because somehow we want to participate in that world. But which world is it? Is it the primary world that Tolkien inhabited as a scholar and a father and a friend? Or is it the secondary reality that he created with his storytelling? Or is it somehow, as I suspect it is, well, it certainly is for me, I suspect it is for many of you, both. Thank you for joining me. To be continued.